We're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices. Today, we're really excited to welcome our guest, Tania Bhattacharyya, founder of Lumos Marketing. Tania, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me here, Christina.
Yes, of course. We're happy to have you here. If you wanted to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns and why you started Lumos Marketing, that would be great.
Definitely. So again, thanks for this opportunity to share. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I have always been committed to advancing and amplifying women's voices, right? So I worked in the nonprofit field for over 12 years, with most of that time serving at an addiction treatment program for women, pregnant women, and women with their children. And before that, I supported my alma mater, the University of California at Irvine, as they built up their law school initiative. And I helped by calling alumni all over the nation and just having brave conversations, getting to know them and further re-engaging them in the mission. So like most people attracted to nonprofits, I fell in love with the roller coaster of making shift happen, right? Creating changes in communities, fighting for justice. And then last year, right? Last year was 2020. Stuff hit the fan, and we continue to be in a triple public health crisis. You know, the pandemic, racism and racial trauma, uptick in mental health diagnoses. And in the nonprofit world, our field was in the thick of it. And I knew a lot of women who are making big differences in the problems that they were trying to solve. And that doesn't just go for nonprofits, you know, that goes for entrepreneurs, people who started for-profit companies, executives, you know, they were all committed to solving a problem. But that's just it. The people who work closest to the heart of our world's biggest problems have the solutions. They're just not always at the table. So I knew there had to be a different way. And so I started Lumos Marketing. It's a personal branding firm for purpose-driven women. And the name Lumos, of course, is, you know, based on the Harry Potter spell, which is all around illumination, around lighting up voices, around being seen, being visible. And we help female leaders stand out as they stand up for their mission to drive change and raise revenue. And most of us have probably heard the phrase that people follow the leaders that they know, like, and trust, right? They'll roll up their sleeves, they'll jump into the arena to help those leaders do what they need to do. But many women struggle with self-limiting beliefs and or a professional environment and a society, quite frankly, that is not always psychologically safe. And so they continue playing small, staying hidden, and stay a best kept secret. But the problem with that, it's when you do that, you leave transformational opportunities on the table. And so I believe we both need to transform corporate culture and society in general to foster safe environments for true authenticity, which then leads to strong personal branding, employee advocacy, which then in turn amplifies and supports the company. And personal branding, no doubt, is the way of the future. You know, as leaders, as executives, as employees, our personal brands are becoming more influential than the brands of our companies themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, this is so timely and a really important need that you are filling in society as well. I think I read somewhere with the pandemic, as you said, we're in the triple public health crisis. I think it set women back to achieve quote unquote pay equality, 36 years. And that's just for white women, right? It's not Black women, Latinx women, women of color as well. So I think the work that you're doing is super important, and it's also a lot. So before we dive into coaching and things like that, I would love to talk about what has brought you joy recently, to share with folks.
Oh, I love that question. I love that question. And my automatic response is my little dog, Gary. Gary brings me joy every single day. He's not here right now. He must be with his father. He's a Chihuahua miniature schnauzer. So he's a Trizer. He's 14 pounds. Yeah, I know. Maybe I can bring him over in a little bit. But he is just, he is, like I said, 14 pounds, but he is fierce. He will not back down from a fight, real or imagined. It's always imagined. And he is my role model because even though he's tiny and small and like just teeny tiny, he thinks he's a big guy, and he takes up space, right? So I try to be like him.
Yes, he is a little dog but has big dog energy. We love to see that. One of the things you mentioned is the importance of not playing small and really advocating and helping women advocate for themselves, which is truly, it's a skill that needs to be learned. How do you help women and women of color become more visible at work and truly advocate for themselves? Like getting that promotion, getting the professional development budget, salary negotiations, all of these hard topics.
Yes. So I will. Okay. So that's a great question. And I think I will start by sharing that I think you have to start with the end in mind. So
Mhm.
you have to set an intentional vision for the impact and the legacy that you want to make in the world, you specifically through your work. And so the organization that you work for probably has a vision statement and a mission statement, maybe core values as well. But I think that in order to, advocate for yourself, I think first you need to determine what is your vision personally. And, your vision is a striking yet simple description of the future world that you're committing to make happen. And without that, you're lost in the sauce. Like there are so many opportunities thrown at us at any given moment. And there's real opportunities like being invited to sit on a panel, serve on a volunteer board, speak on a podcast like this one. These are great, real, helpful opportunities that can help you change hearts and minds, make a name for yourself and your cause, become a subject matter expert. And hopefully the leadership within your organization supports those opportunities and celebrates their staff as they continue to be seen as experts in their particular niche. But as an individual, you have to determine if these opportunities align with your deeper vision, because otherwise it can lead to overwhelm, it can lead to a diluted personal brand, which then actually means less visibility. But one of the things I really want to talk here about in terms of advocating for yourself is that many women, especially women of color, oftentimes receive the lion's share of office housework,
Mhm.
and to advocate for themselves must identify ways to set boundaries and turn those down in order to have the time, the bandwidth, to and get the visible opportunities at work that can advance their careers. So what is office housework? That's like, what does that even mean? So examples of that, real examples of women that I've coached and worked with would be, being assigned as the note taker for a meeting, even though it's your meeting, it's your project that you're
Yeah.
like reporting out on, or being assigned as the traffic control person for the board meeting, because like otherwise they wouldn't be able to find the boardroom on their own, or that one makes me laugh, or, always being the one that is designated to pick up the coffee, even though you're a major decision maker.
Mhm.
Right. And women, especially women of color, are expected to do more of this work, which is why we need to push back. And I want to be clear that these boundaries are meant to ensure we have more of a shot for the opportunities our white and male colleagues are automatically given, especially if they're not asked to do the same housework. And really, the responsibility is on the employer to create more equity around this. But if that's not happening, there are things that the employee can do. And some examples that really resonated with me that I share with people that I coach are actually some examples that I read in the New York Times in an article by Ruchika Tulshan. So she says, you know, um, and again, I just want to say again, this is really important because if we don't say no to these things, we will get burnt out. We will never
Absolutely.
ascend to the positions of greater power and influence we deserve and continue to be seen as the assistant, as the coordinator, even though we are not. So she suggests, estimating how much time you're spending on this type of work and say something like, I think X is going to take me at least Y hours, and I'm on a deadline for this other project. So how about we share the responsibilities among 3 or 4 people? And she also shares, speaking about psychological safety, if there is a workplace environment with enough psychological safety, you could speak directly with your manager and say something like, I've noticed you volunteered me for this type of work again, but not my white male colleagues. Could we talk about that? So again, all of these tasks can push us sideways away from our vision rather than forwards towards the big goal that we have of a changed world. So we've got to stay true to that vision, keep it at the forefront of everything. And over time, staying true to that vision makes us more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the reality is there's only 24 hours in the day and you can't prioritize everything. And it's just not possible to say, yes, and these tasks and these kind of things that you outlined in terms of office work do take up time, and they often fall to women and women of color in offices. So I appreciate that you shared just tangible examples of how to have those kind of uncomfortable conversations at work and really address it head on. I know you mentioned that having a vision and really a desired outcome is important. And for a lot of women, it's in the interview process, nailing the job interview and just really being able to get an offer at the end of it. What have you found to be really important advice for women to tell their story and impact? I know this is something that we discussed when you were working in the nonprofit world. It definitely translates over to kind of what you're doing right now at Lumos.
Yeah, that's a great question. Storytelling is such a wonderful way to instill trust. And, I think the most important currency that we have is trust. Money comes and goes, projects come and go, but trust is key. And we can build trust in a strategic way with storytelling. So one of my favorite story frameworks is actually called a public narrative. You've heard, Barack Obama use this. You've heard it in many, many speeches and stories.
Mhm.
So it combines three stories into one. First, a story of self. And so this is like the personal, vulnerable story that shows why you are called to what you have been called to. And then comes a story of us. And so this is about the collective. So this demonstrates like the shared vision of a group of people, like a company, and it brings the listener into the shared journey so that they're part of it. Right. And then finally, the third part of this framework is the story of now. And that's the challenge that this collective is up against and the choice that it has to make to move forward towards the shared vision. So it's rooted in values. It demonstrates a brand, either a personal brand or a corporate brand, depending on who's telling the story, maybe both, which then amplify each other. And a big part of the story is identifying a powerful choice that you made in your life or a key moment. It might have seemed simple at the time, but it changed the trajectory of your life and set up the path towards your vision. So if I had to, distill that down, advice for women in telling their story, like consider including what were you up against? What was the choice that you made and how did it feel in that moment? And what was the outcome of the choice? And what did it teach you to help? What did it teach you to the point where now you can help others in this way? But of
Mhm.
course, we need to feel psychologically safe and secure to be able to share these vulnerable stories, right? Like that's just a baseline.
Absolutely. You need to have that foundation. And as you said, the organizations that we're in, our employers, our managers, they're all part of that as well. And teammates, I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of examples or stories of how you've empowered women to really own their power and achieve their goals, whether it's in the interview process or they're currently in a job, working on projects and things like that.
Yeah, I want to actually take it back to where I first fell in love with storytelling, which was when I was working for that nonprofit, right? The residential addiction treatment program for women.
Mhm.
And so I began sitting with our patients just before they, quote unquote, graduated treatment or discharged from the treatment process and became an alumni. And I would help them write their story of recovery. So it wasn't their drunkalogs or their story of using drugs and alcohol, which they
Yeah.
were, more accustomed to speaking to. But instead, it was the courageous journey of deciding enough was enough and bravely starting their journey towards sobriety. But it wasn't just a story, right? Each piece was a real example of how words have transformative power. So when these women would read these stories back to themselves or spoke them out loud, it was like written proof of their courage and their worth. And their
Mhm.
words reflected back to them the value of their journey, of their recovery, of who they were, their self-worth. And it gave them a story to inspire others to get help too. So over time, it really changed who they thought they were from an addict, from somebody who was struggling with addiction, who was hopeless, to a transformed miracle, like a woman in recovery. So that's a story of how stories helped women own their power. It's kind of meta, but really that storytelling work is what set me on my trajectory towards helping women share their stories and build up their personal brand. I think stories can change you. They give you a platform towards owning your power, becoming more visible, and they can inspire others to make a change for themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I think stories also act as a major connector between humans and between folks who have similar experiences, but also people who might not have experienced addiction before or experienced whatever the other person is sharing too. So I think that's absolutely so important. One of the things that you also said too was words reflected back to you and just getting that sense of kind of empowerment from others. And a lot of people get that from their manager or leaders at an organization too. And I wanted to ask also just what your advice was for allies, non-women identifying folks to really be allies or accomplices, as some people like to say, in the workplace, especially if they are in that role of not only being a teammate, but a people manager, because I think that's a major skill that people need to intentionally have.
That's a great question. That's a very, very good question. And as of today, it's April 2021. We are in some scary times with a
Yeah.
lot of challenges, nationwide. And I think allies, advocates, especially in management, need to be open about those challenges, creating safe spaces to, explore those challenges, share how they're affecting, people personally, how they're affecting the company. And I know it might seem odd for leaders to be so open about the risks that the organization is facing, about what the nation is facing, but I think it helps women realize where their input can be most valuable, identify what they can do to engage most effectively, how they can become a part of the solutions, and that they're not alone in this struggle, that they are supported through this struggle, whatever that might be. We can pick one of many challenges that we're facing right now as a country, as companies, as people. And I think more than anything, leaders need to come from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. So
Mhm.
my wheelhouse is personal branding, right? So my answer to this is for leaders to advocate for women by giving them a platform to share their lived experience, to share their wisdom into the world, and know it will be honored, know that it will be credited back to them directly, know that they won't be gaslit or, try to say that those experiences weren't valid, setting them up with training around storytelling, building a personal brand, identifying women who over time can become thought leaders and subject matter experts in their field, all of which will support the company, and allowing for this space and creating psychological safety around them doing so without these women wondering if they'll get in trouble or step on toes or have their managers think they're just creating a personal brand so they can get hired elsewhere or feeling outshined by their employees, all of which are examples I've seen in other, in real cases. So, leaders may be saying to bring your authentic self to work, but it's important to look at how does that translate in practice? Are leaders really allowing their staff to truly be themselves at work, or are some people, namely women of color, being harmed or penalized for showing their authentic self? I think management and leaders really need to take a hard, true look at that. And things that they can do are, engage in like a listening tour to see what their companies really think.
Absolutely. I think that goes back to the point you made earlier about trust and it being a really valuable currency and maybe the most valuable thing we can offer someone and really build. And it doesn't happen overnight, but in order to feel that you are psychologically safe to share these stories with your manager or with the company at large and really have that platform, you need to have that trust built into the system and actively work on it, right? It's not a set and forget or we check the box. We are an organization that has trust. And if someone doesn't experience that on an individual level, that's not true. Like you said, just like really empowering and having an authentic experience there is really, really important. Are there any other trends that you see that people leaders and managers need to be aware of in order to make sure that their team and then, the company at large is successful? I know we talked about a lot so far in terms of what's going on in the world and how people are just being more thoughtfully engaging.
Yeah. So, 2020 and 2021 is all about virtual connection. We spent tons of time on Zoom, probably too much time on Zoom. There were no longer in-person conferences and local networking events and other professional opportunities that we were pretty used to. And we crave authenticity, we crave connection and being inspired by something bigger than ourselves. So I'll tell you a story. One of my clients works for a lab, a laboratory, and we started working together to help her get content out on LinkedIn, to help build her own personal brand. And it was a mind shift in that she wasn't posting photos of the lab, she was posting photos of herself, her
Mhm.
thoughts, her vision, her history, her dreams, what she was up to. And there were points in our process where she was like, "Are you sure about this? Like, is anybody going to care what I'm
Yeah.
saying here?" Yet those pieces garnered thousands of views, and messages from people in her target audience wanting to build a relationship with her, take that connection offline, off of LinkedIn, onto a phone call. They wanted to work with her. And this isn't a trend per se. This is how it's always been. But I think that it's important to realize that people don't purchase from companies. They purchase from people. They purchase from the face of the company. Yet none of that posting or that activity would have been possible without the buy-in from the owner of the company and the creation of a culture of safety where she felt safe to post those things. So, authentic storytelling and personal branding doesn't mean sharing your innermost secrets, but rather highlighting pieces of your story and your vision that can help you connect with other people on a professional level. So, there's just a stat that I share all the time, which is that people are 8 times more likely to engage with content that's shared by employees versus content shared by brands or companies themselves. And so, again, not a trend, just something we need to be more aware of. I think leaders and managers need to create a culture of celebration where wins are celebrated publicly, but fails are also celebrated because there's lessons in there. And that all creates a culture of feeling safe to share so that other people outside of the organization can buy into that journey as well.
Yeah, I would argue that a lot of us, if not everybody, is in some sort of way in a people business where you're interacting with people either internally or externally. And that personal connection of sharing your story one on one or on a platform like LinkedIn, especially in a time period where we're in each other's homes right now, you're interacting with people virtually that you might have never met in person. So the only person or persona that is online, which is absolutely crazy to think about right now, but definitely makes sense. I know you probably have a lot of these in your work, but is there a proudest moment that comes to mind where you had that moment of flow thinking, this is exactly what I was meant to do, amplifying, empowering women's stories?
It's every time a woman that I've been working with finally refers to herself as an expert in public or shoots her shot and applies for a speaking opportunity, even though it's scary, or a promotion, even though she doesn't have 10 out of 10 qualifications, because men are more likely to apply for those opportunities, even when they have like 2 of the 10 qualifications, which is fine. Like, I'm not actually judging
Yeah.
that. I think it's, you've got to shoot your shot. And so to remain competitive and at the table, we need to believe in ourselves and overcome what many people call imposter syndrome. But it's not about faking it until you make it. You already have it. You don't have to fake anything. You just have to believe it. And yeah, again, it's anytime a woman, becomes more visible.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Those are kind of tangible ways you can see that there's a mind shift there as well, and that's something you can take with you for the rest of your life into any role you're in, into any like life situation, which I think is really important in terms of skills for connecting too. I know we kind of touched on a lot of different areas of your work and just psychological safety in the workplace, building trust. So a lot of big topics, but is there anything that you think that we haven't touched on that you really want to share with listeners who are thinking about, how can I tell my story to make it the most effective and really make sure that they're thinking about outcomes like we talked about at the top of our discussion?
Well, Christina, you actually brought up a great point just now, which is it really is a lot about mindset because you can buy a book on personal branding. You can, take a course on the specifics and the logistics of personal branding. But more than likely, that book is going to sit on the shelf and collect dust, and that course is going to just, maybe be half watched. And the reason for that is there is a huge mindset shift that comes into play when it comes to personal branding, and a a buildup of self-worth and trust in ourselves and our stories. And so, I know most people wouldn't put personal branding and psychological safety in the same sentence, but I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak on this because there is a real connection. When leaders are vulnerable, open, and create an honest and authentic personal brand, it creates trust, not just in them, but in the company that they're part of. And in companies that have achieved a high level of psychological safety, and natural after effect is that each individual is empowered to build a brand or a reputation of their own, which will then result in greater revenue, customers, fans, and friends of the organization.
Absolutely. All boats rise at the same time. And I can see how personal branding and psychological safety just really are interconnected as well, especially in these new workplaces that everybody is navigating together and hopefully building these new inclusive systems that really empower folks to be their best selves, to produce the most work. And also, to your point earlier, there is a sense of setting healthy boundaries in the workplace as well. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you, or how can they learn more about supporting the work that you do? I always like to ask guests as well.
Yeah, thanks for that question. People can get in touch with me on LinkedIn. That is really my playground. Or you could visit my website, lumosmarketing.co, to learn more about my work with purpose-driven women and building their brand. And I'll just share, like I talked about shooting my shot. Let me go ahead and just plug something I'm doing because
Yeah,
in our busy time crunch world, I've had a real demand for my 1 day personal brand VIP day, where we lay the foundation for
mhm,
that personal brand, including finding your vision, writing your brand story, getting your LinkedIn profile updated, figuring out your target audience and finding them,
yeah.
and actually creating content, like a quarter's worth of content. Because my vision is a world where every person is confident and comfortable with shining their light so they can leave our world better than they found it.
I love that vision. I 100% agree with you. I think everybody should shine their light and everybody has something very unique and specific to offer that is different than anybody else. And really it is a skill set to learn how to tell that story and share those gifts. So I think that definitely makes sense. And thank you for sharing all of the work that you're doing here today, Tania. We really appreciate it.
Of course, I appreciate you and everything that you're doing. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yes, of course. We'll have all of your links in the bio with this episode. And thank you to our viewers for listening and joining us here today. Here at All Voices, we believe in empowering all employees to speak up in order for everyone at the organization to succeed. We'll speak soon.